Detective Maya Torres had seen plenty of desperate situations in her 10 years with the Portland Police Department, but nothing quite compared to standing in a bridal boutique at 8 in the morning, holding a fake engagement ring. The case had gone cold 6 months ago, and her captain was ready to close it permanently. A wealthy businesswoman named Victoria Chen had vanished without a trace from her own engagement party, leaving behind only questions and a grieving fiancé. Maya had exhausted every conventional lead, every witness interview, every piece of evidence. The file sat on her desk like a monument to failure, mocking her dedication and skills. But yesterday, while reviewing old surveillance footage for the 100th time, she had noticed something peculiar about the wedding planner who had organized Victoria's party. The wedding planner, Sienna Blackwood, ran an exclusive company called Everlasting Moments that catered to Portland's elite couples. Maya had interviewed her months ago, finding nothing suspicious beyond the woman's overly polished demeanor and rehearsed answers. But the surveillance footage revealed something the initial investigation had missed. Sienna had been photographed at 3 other engagement parties over the past 2 years, all featuring wealthy women who had subsequently experienced mysterious incidents. One had her bank accounts drained, another had her business sabotaged, and a third had narrowly escaped a serious threat to her safety. The connection was too specific to ignore, too calculated to be coincidence. Maya needed to get close to Sienna, to infiltrate her exclusive clientele, and gather evidence. The only way to do that was to become exactly what Sienna's company specialized in serving, a wealthy couple planning their dream wedding. Maya's partner, Detective James Rivera, had initially laughed at her proposal until he saw the determination in her eyes. The department wouldn't officially sanction an undercover operation this elaborate, which meant Maya would be operating in a gray area, risking her career on a hunch. She needed a fake fiancé, someone convincing enough to pass as a wealthy professional, someone comfortable enough with the deception to maintain it for weeks or months. James had suggested hiring an undercover officer from another precinct, but Maya knew that wouldn't work because Sienna clearly did extensive background checks on her clients. She needed someone with a real professional reputation, real connections, and absolutely no ties to law enforcement. After 2 days of desperate searching through her limited personal network, Maya had nearly given up when James mentioned his younger sister knew someone who might be perfect for the role. That someone was Zoe Lancaster, a successful architectural photographer with an impressive portfolio and a client list that read like a who's who of Portland's cultural elite. James had explained that Zoe was between major projects, adventurous enough to consider something unconventional, and most importantly, openly gay with enough experience navigating elite social circles to pull off the deception. Maya had felt her stomach twist with anxiety when James first said Zoe's name, remembering a chance encounter at his birthday party 2 years ago. She had met Zoe briefly that night, exchanging perhaps 10 words before Maya had been called away to a crime scene. But those 10 words had lingered in Maya's memory far longer than they should have, along with Zoe's easy smile and the way her dark eyes had reflected the party lights. Now she was about to propose a fake engagement to a woman she barely knew but couldn't quite forget. Zoe had agreed to meet at the bridal boutique, neutral territory that would help them both get into character and establish their cover story. Maya arrived early, her detective's instinct making her scan the upscale shop with its pristine white walls and glittering display cases. The owner, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, had agreed to let them use the private consultation room under the guise of being early shoppers. Maya paced between the dress racks, rehearsing her pitch for the 100th time, trying to find words that wouldn't make her sound completely insane. She was asking a civilian to risk herself for a case that might not even pan out, to spend weeks or months pretending to be in love with a detective she'd met once. The engagement ring in her pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds, a physical reminder of the elaborate deception she was about to construct. The boutique door chimed, and Maya's breath caught as Zoe Lancaster walked in, somehow even more striking than Maya remembered from that brief party encounter. Zoe wore dark jeans and a leather jacket over a simple white shirt, her black hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that somehow looked effortlessly elegant. She carried a camera bag over one shoulder, and her eyes scanned the boutique with the same analytical attention Maya had just applied to the space. When Zoe's gaze found Maya standing awkwardly between wedding dresses, a slow smile spread across her face that made Maya's carefully prepared speech evaporate from her mind. Zoe walked over with confident, unhurried steps, extending her hand in greeting while her dark eyes sparkled with what looked like amusement. Maya shook her hand, feeling the warmth of Zoe's palm against hers, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her professional career. "So," Zoe said, her voice carrying a hint of humor that somehow put Maya at ease despite the absurdity of their situation. "James tells me you need a fake wife to catch a criminal. I have to say, Detective Torres, that's definitely the most interesting proposition I've received this year." She released Maya's hand and glanced around the boutique with obvious appreciation for the elegant space. "I'm assuming this means we're going full undercover couple, complete with backstory, engagement photos, and possibly awkward conversations with my actual mother about why I didn't mention dating someone?" Her eyebrow arched in question, but her tone remained light, almost playful despite the serious nature of what Maya was proposing. Maya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, recognizing that Zoe understood the gravity but wasn't intimidated by it. This might actually work, Maya thought, if she could just remember how to form complete sentences around this woman who seemed to fill the boutique with effortless charisma. Maya cleared her throat and gestured toward the private consultation room at the back of the boutique, needing the relative privacy to explain the full scope of what she was asking. They settled into plush velvet chairs while Patricia discreetly closed the door, leaving them alone with crystal champagne flutes and a portfolio of wedding designs. Maya pulled out a slim folder from her bag, containing carefully selected details about the case that wouldn't compromise the investigation but would give Zoe enough information to make an informed decision. She slid it across the glass table between them, watching Zoe's expression shift from casual interest to focused concentration as she began reading. The folder contained photos of Victoria Chen, newspaper clippings about her disappearance, and background information on Sienna Blackwood's wedding planning company. Maya had included a breakdown of the patterns she discovered, the 3 other wealthy women who had been Sienna's clients before experiencing catastrophic events. Zoe's fingers traced the timeline Maya had constructed, and when she looked up, the humor had faded from her eyes, replaced by something sharper and more serious. "Victoria Chen," Zoe said quietly, recognition flickering across her features as she studied the photograph of the missing woman. "I actually met her once, about 18 months ago at a gallery opening in the Pearl District. She was brilliant, funny, passionate about supporting local artists." Zoe's voice carried genuine sadness as she continued. "I remember thinking she seemed so happy that night, talking about her upcoming engagement. I had no idea she was the woman who vanished." She looked up at Maya with renewed intensity, and Maya could see the moment Zoe's decision crystallized in those dark eyes. "If there's even a chance this Sienna Blackwood is connected to what happened to Victoria, then yes, I'm in. What do we need to do?" The conviction in Zoe's voice surprised Maya, who had prepared herself for more questions, more hesitation, more reasonable doubt about diving into a potentially dangerous undercover operation. Maya felt relief wash through her, followed immediately by a wave of responsibility for what she was asking this woman to risk. She explained the plan methodically, laying out each step as if briefing a fellow officer rather than a civilian volunteer. They would need to create believable backstories, establish themselves on social media as a couple, and most importantly, secure a consultation with everlasting moments based on their fabricated wealth and status. Maya had already created a paper trail suggesting that Maya Reyes was a successful private equity investor, using her mother's maiden name and some creative financial documentation that would pass casual scrutiny. Zoe would use her real professional identity as an architectural photographer, which provided both authenticity and the kind of artistic prestige that Sienna's clientele typically possessed. They would need to be photographed together, create a romantic narrative convincing enough to fool a woman who made her living reading people and orchestrating perfect moments. Maya watched Zoe process each element of the plan, noting how quickly the photographer's mind seemed to work through logistics and potential complications. "We'll need to move quickly," Maya continued, pulling out her phone to show Zoe the fabricated social media profiles she'd already begun constructing. "Sienna books months in advance, but I have a contact who can get us bumped up the waiting list if we're willing to pay premium prices. We need to establish our relationship publicly starting today, which means we need our story straight and our chemistry believable." The word chemistry felt dangerous in Maya's mouth, acknowledging something she'd been trying to ignore since Zoe walked through the boutique door. Zoe leaned closer to examine the phone screen, her shoulder brushing against Maya's, and Maya caught the scent of something woodsy and clean, like cedar and rain. "Focus," she commanded herself. "This is an investigation, not whatever your racing pulse thinks it is." Zoe's fingers swiped through the profile photos Maya had selected, mostly stock images that would need to be replaced with authentic shots of the two of them together. "These won't work," Zoe said definitively, handing the phone back to Maya with a slight shake of her head. Sienna Blackwood caters to elite clients, which means she has an eye for authenticity and a nose for anything staged or fake. Stock photos and generic couple shots will raise red flags immediately, especially if she's as careful as you think she is. Zoe pulled her own camera from the bag at her feet, a professional-grade Canon that looked well-loved and frequently used. "We need real photos, genuine moments that show actual chemistry and connection between two people who are supposedly in love enough to get married. That means we need to actually spend time together, go places, create memories that translate authentically through the lens." She met Maya's eyes directly, and Maya saw both challenge and something warmer in that gaze. "How committed are you to making this believable, Detective Torres? Because halfway won't fool someone like Sienna Blackwood. We need to go all in." The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went beyond the investigation, and Maya found herself nodding before she'd fully thought through what all in might mean. Zoe's practical assessment was absolutely correct from both an investigative and artistic standpoint, but it also meant they would need to build genuine rapport, spend significant time together, and create the kind of intimate moments that convinced people they were in love. Maya had gone undercover before, played various roles from drug buyer to smuggling contact, but she'd never had to fake a romantic relationship, never had to manufacture the kind of emotional vulnerability that convinced people they were witnessing real love. The prospect terrified her more than any armed suspect or dangerous stakeout ever had, especially with someone who already made her pulse race with a simple smile. But Zoe was right, and Maya's commitment to finding Victoria Chen outweighed her personal discomfort with the situation. She extended her hand across the table, a formal gesture to seal their unusual partnership. "All in," Maya agreed, feeling Zoe's hand clasp hers with firm confidence that somehow steadied the nervous energy buzzing through Maya's system. "We start today. I clear my afternoon, you clear your schedule, and we begin building Maya and Zoe's love story convincingly enough to fool Portland's most exclusive wedding planner." She pulled out the engagement ring she'd been carrying, a simple but elegant platinum band with a single diamond that caught the boutique's soft lighting. It had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few family heirlooms Maya possessed, and using it for this deception felt both appropriate and slightly sacrilegious. She offered it to Zoe, watching the photographer examine the ring with careful appreciation for its craftsmanship and history. "We should make this official, at least for the cameras. Patricia has agreed to let us stage some photos here in the boutique, which gives us romantic content and establishes a timeline. Then we'll need to be seen together around Portland, building our digital footprint before we approach Sienna." Zoe slipped the ring onto her left hand, and Maya's grandmother's ring fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for exactly this moment, exactly this hand. The afternoon sun slanted through the boutique windows as Patricia returned with an assistant carrying garment bags filled with sample dresses that Zoe could model for their staged engagement photos. Maya watched Zoe examine the dresses with professional appreciation, discussing lighting angles and composition with Patricia, while Maya tried to slow her racing thoughts about what the next few hours would entail. They needed photos that looked genuine, moments captured that suggested real joy and authentic connection between two women supposedly planning their future together. Patricia had offered to act as their photographer using Zoe's camera, understanding that the couple themselves couldn't take the shots that would populate their social media accounts. Maya excused herself briefly to call James, updating her partner on Zoe's agreement and confirming that their undercover operation was officially beginning. James sounded equal parts relieved and worried, reminding Maya to be careful not just physically but emotionally, a warning that Maya dismissed perhaps too quickly before ending the call. When Maya returned to the consultation room, she found Zoe had changed into a simple ivory dress that somehow transformed her from casual photographer into someone who belonged in this elegant space. The dress wasn't a full wedding gown, but rather a cocktail-length creation with delicate lace sleeves that left Zoe's collarbones bare and caught the light like captured moonbeams. Maya's breath stuttered in her chest, professional detachment evaporating as she took in the sight of Zoe standing before the boutique's famous floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Zoe turned when she heard Maya enter, and something flickered across her face, too quickly for Maya to identify before her expression settled into an easy smile. Patricia thought we should start simple, engagement announcement-style photos before moving to anything more elaborate, Zoe explained, gesturing to where the boutique owner had set up a small backdrop with soft lighting. She'll take the photos while we just focus on looking like two people who can't wait to spend their lives together. Think you can handle that, detective? The teasing tone helped break the tension that had been building in Maya's chest, and she found herself laughing, a genuine sound that surprised them both. Maya had worn her nicest blazer over dark jeans, wanting to look put together without being too formal, and she was suddenly grateful for the instinct that had made her choose clothes carefully that morning. Patricia positioned them near the mirror's reflection, explaining that she wanted to capture both their direct interaction and the reflection showing them from a different angle. Maya stood awkwardly at first, unsure where to put her hands or how to position herself next to Zoe without looking stiff and uncomfortable. Zoe seemed to sense her uncertainty because she stepped closer, closing the distance between them with confident ease, and gently took Maya's hand. "Just breathe," Zoe murmured quietly enough that only Maya could hear. "Forget the camera, forget the case, just be here with me for a moment." Her thumb brushed across Maya's knuckles, a small gesture that somehow grounded the detective in the present. Maya found herself following Zoe's instruction, letting her awareness narrow to just the woman in front of her, the warmth of her hand, the soft smile playing at her lips. Patricia's camera clicked in the background, but Maya barely registered the sound as she met Zoe's eyes and saw something genuine reflected there beneath the performance. They talked quietly while Patricia worked, Zoe asking Maya about her grandmother, whose ring now graced Zoe's finger, Maya sharing stories about the fierce woman who had raised her after her parents died. The conversation flowed naturally, unexpectedly easy despite the manufactured nature of their situation, and Maya found herself genuinely laughing at Zoe's story about a disastrous photo shoot involving a stubborn cat and a very expensive sculpture. Patricia directed them through various poses, some traditional and others more candid, capturing moments of supposed spontaneity that were actually carefully choreographed. But somewhere between the staged positions and directed smiles, something shifted, and Maya realized she wasn't entirely acting anymore when she looked at Zoe with open affection. The realization should have alarmed her, should have triggered all the professional warnings about maintaining emotional distance during undercover work. Instead, Maya felt a strange sense of rightness, as though this elaborate deception was somehow leading her towards something real despite its foundation in lies. They took a break while Patricia reviewed the photos on Zoe's camera, both women pronouncing themselves satisfied with the authentic feel of the images. Zoe didn't immediately change out of the ivory dress, instead joining Maya near the boutique windows where afternoon light painted everything gold. "These are good," Zoe said, scrolling through the images on her camera's display screen. "They'll convince people we're legitimate because the emotion reads as genuine in the photos. That's the advantage of actually liking someone, I suppose. The camera doesn't lie about chemistry." She glanced up at Maya, and there was a question in her eyes that Maya wasn't ready to answer. The acknowledgement that something beyond performance was happening between them hung unspoken in the air. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from her police contact at the courthouse, confirming that the background check on Maya Reyes had been successfully planted in the system where Sienna Blackwood would find it during her inevitable vetting process. The text reminded Maya why they were here, the real stakes beneath the pretty dresses and romantic photos. Victoria Chen was still missing, possibly in danger, and Sienna Blackwood might hold the answers that had eluded Maya for 6 months. She showed Zoe the message, watching the photographer's expression shift back to seriousness as they remembered the true purpose of their arrangement. "We should go," Maya said, checking her watch and calculating how many hours they had before sunset would ruin the natural lighting Zoe preferred. "You mentioned needing genuine moments around Portland. I know a few places that might work, locations where Sienna's wealthy clients typically spend time. We need to be seen, establish our presence in the right circles." Zoe nodded agreement and went to change back into her regular clothes, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and the uncomfortable awareness that she was already more invested in this fake relationship than was professionally wise. 30 minutes later, they were in Maya's car, driving toward the Pearl District with a list of locations that would serve both their investigation and their need for authentic photos. Zoe had brought her camera and a smaller backup, along with a portable lighting kit that suggested she took her role as their official photographer seriously. They decided to start at Powell's City of Books, the massive independent bookstore that attracted both tourists and locals, particularly Portland's creative and intellectual class. Maya parked on a nearby street, and they walked together toward the iconic building, Zoe explaining her vision for the shots they would take. "Bookstores are intimate spaces where couples naturally gravitate toward sharing interests," Zoe said as they approached Powell's entrance. "We can get photos of us browsing together, reading to each other, those small domestic moments that suggest comfort and connection. Plus, it's a very Portland location, which adds authenticity to our story as locals." She reached for Maya's hand as they entered the store, and the gesture felt both calculated and completely natural. Inside Powell's, they wandered through the color-coded rooms with their towering shelves and endless possibilities, Zoe periodically setting up her camera on shelves or asking passing strangers to snap photos of them together. Maya found herself actually enjoying the process, relaxing into the role as they discovered shared interests in detective novels and true crime books, laughing over their mutual love of mystery series and debate about various authors' merits. They found a quiet corner in the gold room, surrounded by science fiction and fantasy, where Zoe set up her camera's timer and they sat together on the floor against a bookshelf. Maya held a book open between them, but neither was reading as Zoe leaned her head against Maya's shoulder and the camera captured the moment. It looked perfect, Maya thought when they reviewed the image later, two women comfortable in each other's space, sharing quiet intimacy in a public place. It looked exactly like love, and the scariest part was how little Maya had to pretend to achieve that authenticity. They spent 2 hours in Powell's, accumulating photos and genuinely enjoying each other's company, before moving on to their next location as dusk began painting Portland's sky in shades of amber and rose. Their next stop was the Portland Japanese Garden, a location Maya had chosen specifically because Sienna Blackwood had posted photos from there with at least 2 of her previous clients. The garden would be closing soon, but Maya had called ahead and arranged a private evening session, using her, Maya Reyes, identity and implying the kind of wealth that made special accommodations possible. They arrived as the last public visitors were leaving, greeted by a staff member who led them through the entrance with deferential politeness that made Maya uncomfortable with her deception. The garden stretched before them in carefully manicured beauty, stone paths winding through maple trees and past tranquil ponds where koi fish created ripples in the darkening water. Zoe immediately began composing shots, her photographer's eye finding angles and moments that Maya would never have noticed, capturing the interplay of fading daylight and the garden's carefully placed lanterns beginning to glow. They walked in comfortable silence, punctuated by Zoe's occasional direction for Maya to pause or move slightly for better composition. Near the moon bridge, with its dramatic arch reflected in the pond below, Zoe set up what she called the proposal recreation shot that would anchor their engagement announcement online. She positioned Maya at the bridge's apex, instructing her to kneel as though proposing while Zoe stood before her with the garden's beauty spread behind them. The pose felt absurd and performative until Maya looked up and saw Zoe silhouetted against the twilight sky, her expression soft with something that looked remarkably like genuine emotion. Maya forgot about the camera, about the investigation, about everything except the woman standing before her and the ring box she held containing a placeholder band they'd use for the shot. Zoe Lancaster. Maya improvised quietly, suddenly wanting to fill this staged moment with words that felt true even if the situation was false. Will you pretend to marry me for reasons that have nothing to do with how you make my heart race and everything to do with solving a case? The words were meant to be light, teasing acknowledgement of their absurd situation, but they came out sounding far more sincere than Maya had intended. Zoe's laugh was soft and genuine, and she reached down to pull Maya to her feet rather than maintaining the proposal pose. That might be the most honest proposal in the history of fake engagements, Zoe said, her hands still holding Maya's as they stood together on the bridge. Yes, Detective Torres, I'll pretend to marry you while we both pretend we're not feeling things that are definitely not pretend. The admission hung between them, acknowledging what they'd both been carefully not discussing all afternoon. Before Maya could respond or overthink or retreat into professional distance, Zoe leaned in and kissed her, a brief soft press of lips that sent electricity racing through Maya's nervous system. It was over almost before it began, chaste enough to be appropriate for a public garden but intimate enough to fundamentally shift something between them. Zoe pulled back slightly, her eyes searching Maya's face for a reaction. For authenticity, she said softly, but her smile suggested she knew that justification was as thin as the evening mist rising from the pond below them. Maya's mind raced through a dozen reasons why kissing Zoe was a terrible idea professionally and personally, but her body had apparently decided those reasons were irrelevant because she found herself closing the distance between them for a second kiss. This one lasted longer, deeper, Zoe's hand coming up to cup Maya's jaw while Maya's arms circled Zoe's waist, pulling her closer on the narrow bridge with the garden darkening around them. They broke apart when they heard footsteps on the path below, the staff member politely indicating that the garden would be fully closing in 15 minutes. Reality crashed back over Maya like cold water, reminding her that she was supposed to be a professional detective conducting an investigation, not someone kissing a civilian she'd recruited into a potentially dangerous undercover operation. She stepped back, creating physical distance while her heart still hammered against her ribs, and saw her own confusion and desire reflected in Zoe's dark eyes. They needed to talk about what was happening between them, establish boundaries, acknowledge the complication they'd just created, but the words stuck in Maya's throat beneath the weight of too many conflicting emotions. They walked back to the car in charged silence, the evening growing properly dark around them as Portland's lights began their nightly illumination. Zoe carried her camera equipment with careful attention, and Maya noticed the photographer's hands were slightly unsteady, suggesting she was equally affected by what had happened on the moon bridge. Maya drove through evening traffic on autopilot, her detective's mind trying to compartmentalize and analyze what had just occurred while her emotional self was still caught in the sensation of Zoe's lips against hers. They needed dinner, needed to continue building their public presence as a couple, needed to maintain the momentum of their first day establishing their relationship in Portland's social consciousness. But they also needed to address the elephant now occupying the car with them, the fact that their fake relationship had just acquired some very real emotional complications. Maya pulled into a parking space near a restaurant in the Alberta Arts District, another location where Sienna's wealthy clients were known to frequent, and finally turned to face Zoe in the car's dim interior. "We should talk about what just happened," Maya said, her detective's training insisting on addressing problems directly rather than letting them fester. "I kissed you," which was unprofessional and potentially compromising to the investigation, not to mention unfair to you given that I'm asking you to take risks for this case. The words came out more formal than Maya intended, her default professional tone emerging as protection against the vulnerability she felt. Zoe had been studying the camera in her lap, but now she looked up with an expression that was difficult to read in the shadowy car. "You kissed me after I kissed you first," Zoe corrected gently, "which means we're both guilty of being unprofessional if we're keeping score. And Maya, I'm a grown woman who agreed to this knowing exactly what I was getting into, risk and all. You're not responsible for protecting me from my own choices." She reached across the center console to take Maya's hand, her thumb tracing the same gentle pattern it had earlier in the boutique. "What happened on that bridge was real, at least for me, and I think it was real for you too. That complicates things, yes, but it doesn't have to derail the investigation." Maya wanted to argue, to maintain that they should establish professional distance and keep their arrangement strictly business despite what had happened. But Zoe's hand in hers felt right in a way that Maya couldn't rationalize away, and the truth was that their chemistry had been present from the moment Zoe walked into the bridal boutique that morning. Fighting it would probably make their cover less convincing, Maya told herself, knowing that was partly justification but also partly true. "Okay," Maya said finally, accepting that they were navigating uncharted territory without a clear map or protocol. "We acknowledge that something real is happening between us, and we agree to be honest about it rather than pretending otherwise. But we also stay focused on the case, on finding out what happened to Victoria Chen, because that's why we're doing this in the first place." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a framework they could work within, a way to honor both the investigation and the unexpected connection developing between them. Zoe nodded agreement, squeezing Maya's hand once before releasing it so they could exit the car and head into the restaurant for their next public appearance as Portland's newest engaged couple. The restaurant, a farm-to-table establishment called Harvest Moon, was exactly the kind of place that attracted Portland's creative professionals and successful entrepreneurs. Maya had made a reservation under her fake name, and they were seated at a cozy corner table with exposed brick walls and candlelight that created an intimate atmosphere. Their server, a young woman with colorful tattoos and genuine enthusiasm, congratulated them on their engagement when she noticed Zoe's ring, asking how long they'd been together and gushing about how cute they were as a couple. Maya and Zoe fell into their cover story smoothly, the narrative they'd constructed earlier flowing naturally in conversation. They'd been dating for 8 months, Maya explained, having met at a gallery opening where Zoe was photographing the space and Maya was there with friends. They'd connected over a shared love of travel and art, had taken their first trip together to Vancouver Island, and Maya had proposed during a weekend getaway to the Japanese garden just that afternoon. The lies came easily, built on a foundation of truth about their genuine compatibility and the real attraction that had developed between them over the course of a single day. Over dinner, they refined their backstory further, adding details that would withstand scrutiny from someone as careful as Sienna Blackwood. Maya's fictional career in private equity focused on sustainable technology investments, which aligned with Portland's environmental values and provided vague enough details to avoid easy verification. Zoe's real career as an architectural photographer remained unchanged, though they invented a recent major exhibition at a prestigious gallery that had supposedly elevated her profile. They discussed wedding preferences, favorite flowers, ideal venues, and all the details that an engaged couple would naturally know about each other. Maya found herself genuinely learning about Zoe in the process, discovering that she preferred peonies over roses, that she dreamed of traveling to Iceland to photograph the Northern Lights, and that her favorite childhood memory involved helping her grandmother bake bread on Sunday mornings. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, professional necessity blending seamlessly with genuine curiosity about each other's lives. By the time their entrees arrived, Maya realized she was no longer consciously performing the role of Zoe's fiancée, but simply enjoying dinner with someone who fascinated her. Their server returned periodically to refill water glasses and check on their meal, and Maya noticed the woman's genuine smile when she observed them together, the way she seemed charmed by their obvious connection. This was exactly what they needed, Maya thought, authentic reactions from people who witnessed their relationship and would remember them as a legitimate couple if anyone came asking questions later. After dinner, they lingered over dessert and coffee, neither seeming eager to end the evening despite having accomplished their goal of establishing public presence. Zoe shared stories from various photography assignments, making Maya laugh with tales of difficult clients and unexpected disasters that had somehow resulted in beautiful work. Maya found herself reciprocating with edited versions of police work stories, carefully omitting the darker aspects, but sharing the occasional absurdity of her job. The conversation felt natural, comfortable, like something that had been developing for months rather than hours, and Maya had to keep reminding herself that this intimacy was partially constructed for investigative purposes, even as it felt completely genuine. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from a contact who'd promised to help them bypass Sienna Blackwood's waiting list. The text contained good news and complicated logistics. They had secured a consultation appointment with Everlasting Moments for the following afternoon, an impossibly quick turnaround that had cost Maya a significant favor she'd have to repay eventually. The short timeline meant they needed to accelerate their online presence immediately, posting their engagement announcement and photos tonight to establish their digital footprint before meeting Sienna. Maya showed Zoe the message, watching excitement and nervousness cross the photographer's features in quick succession. They paid their bill, leaving a generous tip that Maya Reyes could afford, and headed back to Maya's apartment where they could upload photos and create the social media narrative that would support their cover story. The drive took 20 minutes through Portland's nighttime streets, and Maya found herself hyper-aware of Zoe's presence in the passenger seat, the reality of inviting this woman into her personal space suddenly feeling more intimate than anything they'd done in public. Maya's apartment was a modest two-bedroom in the Hawthorne district, clean and organized in the way of someone who spent more time at work than at home. She'd warned Zoe that it wasn't decorated for guests, but the photographer moved through the space with easy comfort, admiring the few pieces of art Maya owned and the wall of bookshelves that dominated the living room. They settled on Maya's couch with laptops and phones, beginning the process of crafting their digital engagement announcement. Zoe had already transferred the day's photos from her camera, and they spent an hour selecting the best images, editing them with professional skill that made Maya grateful for Zoe's expertise. The photos told a convincing story. The boutique shots showed joyful surprise and tender intimacy. Powell's images captured comfortable domesticity, and the Japanese garden pictures conveyed romantic beauty that made Maya's breath catch when she saw them enlarged on screen. The kiss on the moon bridge, captured by Zoe's camera timer, was particularly stunning. Two silhouettes merged against the garden's twilight beauty in a moment that looked stolen from a romance novel. They crafted the announcement text together, Maya providing the basic facts while Zoe added emotional touches that made the post feel personal rather than performative. "We wanted to share some exciting news," the post began, accompanied by a photo of them at Powell's with Zoe's head on Maya's shoulder and matching smiles of contentment. "After 8 incredible months together, Maya asked me to marry her in the most perfect setting, and I said yes to a lifetime of adventures together." The text went on to thank friends and family for their support, mention their excitement about planning their dream wedding, and express gratitude for finding each other in a city full of possibility. It struck exactly the right tone, Maya thought, earnest without being saccharine, personal without oversharing, the kind of announcement that would blend seamlessly into social media feeds while establishing their legitimacy. They posted it simultaneously to their respective accounts, tagging each other and using strategic hashtags that would help Sienna Blackwood find them during her inevitable background research. The response was immediate and overwhelming, likes and comments flooding in from Zoe's extensive network of artists, photographers, and Portland creative professionals. Maya's much smaller social circle of carefully constructed contacts also responded, and she had to periodically refresh the fake Maya Reyes profile to keep up with congratulations from people who believed they knew her. They sat together on the couch, reading comments aloud and laughing at particularly enthusiastic responses, the evening taking on a surreal quality as their fabricated relationship received genuine celebration from hundreds of strangers. James sent Maya a private message that simply read, "You two look happy. Be careful with your heart, Humana," with a worried face emoji that made Maya's chest tighten with affection for her partner's protective nature. She showed the message to Zoe, who smiled softly and typed out her own message to James thanking him for introducing them, a nice touch that added authenticity to their story while also being genuinely true in its own way. As midnight approached, Maya realized they needed to discuss logistics for their meeting with Sienna Blackwood the following afternoon. They would need to arrive together, present a united front, and maintain their cover throughout what would likely be an extensive consultation process. Maya pulled out her case file on Sienna, sharing details with Zoe that would help her understand the woman they were about to deceive. Sienna Blackwood was 43 years old, had founded Everlasting Moments 8 years ago after working as an event coordinator for various luxury hotels. She had impeccable credentials, glowing reviews from past clients, and absolutely nothing in her background that suggested criminal activity except for the pattern Maya had discovered connecting her to wealthy women who'd experienced disasters. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but Maya's detective instincts insisted there was something wrong about Sienna, something calculating beneath her polished, professional exterior. Zoe listened intently, asking perceptive questions about Sienna's business practices and client demographics, her photographer's eye for detail translating well to investigative thinking. They rehearsed potential questions Sienna might ask, refining their answers to maintain consistency with their social media narrative and constructed backgrounds. Maya coached Zoe on subtle interrogation techniques, explaining how Sienna might try to catch them in contradictions or test the authenticity of their relationship through seemingly casual questions. Zoe proved to be a quick study, her natural intelligence and creative thinking making her adapt easily to the deception required for undercover work. By 1 a.m, they were both exhausted, the adrenaline of the day giving way to the fatigue of maintaining constant performance even when it felt increasingly genuine. Maya offered Zoe the guest bedroom, insisting it was too late for the photographer to drive home safely, and Zoe accepted with a grateful smile that made Maya's heart do complicated things she wasn't ready to analyze. They said goodnight in the hallway between bedrooms, a brief moment where they stood close enough to kiss again but both chose restraint, acknowledging without words that they needed some space to process everything that had happened in a single transformative day. Maya woke before dawn, her internal clock trained by years of early morning shifts and crime scenes that didn't wait for civilized hours. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of her apartment, the familiar creaks and settling noises, and the unfamiliar presence of someone else sleeping in her guest room. The events of the previous day replayed in her mind with crystal clarity, each moment from the bridal boutique to the goodnight in the hallway feeling both surreal and inevitable. She'd crossed professional lines, allowed personal feelings to complicate an investigation, and somehow felt more alive and focused than she had in months. Maya reached for her phone on the nightstand, finding messages from James checking in and a notification that their engagement announcement had been shared over 300 times during the night. Their fabricated relationship was spreading through Portland's social networks exactly as planned, creating the digital footprint that would make them visible to Sienna Blackwood's careful vetting process. Maya took a screenshot of the engagement metrics to document for her case file, then quietly got up to start coffee before Zoe woke. The apartment was still dark when Maya padded to the kitchen, the city beyond her windows just beginning to show hints of dawn along the eastern horizon. She started her coffee maker and pulled out her laptop, using the quiet morning hours to review everything she knew about Sienna Blackwood and Everlasting Moments. The wedding planner's website was beautiful and professional, featuring testimonials from satisfied clients and galleries of gorgeous weddings she'd orchestrated. Maya had memorized every page during her initial investigation, but she reviewed it again now with fresh eyes, looking for details she might have missed. Sienna's about page emphasized her commitment to making each couple's dreams come true, her attention to detail, and her exclusive focus on clients who valued quality and personalization. The language was warm and inviting, but Maya detected something calculating beneath the friendly marketing copy, a sense that Sienna was always assessing, always measuring the value of potential clients beyond just their wedding budgets. Maya was deep in her review when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Zoe emerging from the guest room, hair tousled from sleep, and wearing one of Maya's oversized sweatshirts that she must have borrowed from the closet. The sight did something complicated to Maya's chest, a domestic intimacy that felt simultaneously too fast and perfectly natural. "Morning," Zoe said, her voice still rough with sleep as she headed for the coffee maker with the confidence of someone already comfortable in Maya's space. "I hope you don't mind. I found this in the guest room closet, and my shirt from yesterday wasn't exactly comfortable to sleep in." She poured herself coffee and joined Maya at the small kitchen table, peering at the laptop screen with interest. "Reviewing the target? We have, about 8 hours until we need to be at our office." Zoe's ability to shift seamlessly between the personal and professional continued to impress Maya, who had spent years carefully separating those aspects of her life. They spent the morning preparing for their meeting with Sienna, going over their cover story until it felt like genuine memory rather than rehearsed fiction. Maya quizzed Zoe on details like where they'd had their first date, what Maya had worn when she proposed, what kind of music they wanted at their wedding. Zoe answered without hesitation, adding creative touches that made their story richer and more believable. They decided Maya would take the lead in discussing budget and logistics, presenting herself as the more practical partner, while Zoe would focus on aesthetic vision and emotional elements, playing to her real strengths as a photographer. The dynamic felt natural, complementary, exactly the kind of balance that real couples developed over time. By mid-morning, they'd rehearsed enough that Maya felt confident they could maintain their cover under Sienna's scrutiny, though a knot of anxiety still tightened in her stomach when she thought about sitting across from the woman who might be responsible for Victoria Chen's disappearance. They dressed carefully for the meeting, Maya in an expensive blazer and tailored pants that suggested successful private equity investor, Zoe in a designer dress that showcased her artistic sensibility while maintaining professional polish. Maya's grandmother's ring looked perfect on Zoe's hand, catching light and drawing the eye, a visible symbol of their supposed commitment. They reviewed their appearance in Maya's full-length mirror, standing side by side and analyzing their presentation with the same attention Maya usually applied to undercover operations. They looked like exactly what they were pretending to be, a successful, attractive couple with the resources and taste to afford Sienna Blackwood's exclusive services. Maya felt Zoe's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing naturally, and when their eyes met in the mirror's reflection, Maya saw her own nervous determination reflected back. "We've got this," Zoe said quietly, squeezing Maya's hand. "We look perfect, our story is solid, and we're going to find out what happened to Victoria Chen. Just remember to breathe and trust that we're a good team." The drive to Sienna's office took 30 minutes through midday Portland traffic, giving them time to settle into their roles and run through their story one final time. Everlasting Moments was located in a renovated historic building in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and enormous windows that flooded the space with natural light. They parked in the adjacent lot and sat in the car for a moment, both taking deep breaths before stepping into the performance that would hopefully provide answers Maya had been seeking for 6 months. No matter what happens in there, Maya said, turning to face Zoe before they exited the car. "Thank you for doing this. I know I recruited you into something complicated and potentially dangerous, and you could have said no at any point." Zoe reached across the center console to cup Maya's face, her thumb brushing across Maya's cheekbone in a gesture that felt protective and tender. "I said yes because finding Victoria matters, but also because spending time with you has been the most interesting and genuine experience I've had in years. So stop thanking me and let's go catch a criminal." The reception area of Everlasting Moments was designed to impress, featuring elegant furniture, artfully arranged flowers, and walls covered with photographs from successful weddings Sienna had planned. A young receptionist greeted them with professional warmth, confirming their appointment and offering champagne while they waited. Maya accepted for both of them, maintaining the role of a couple celebrating their engagement rather than investigators pursuing a suspect. They sat close together on a velvet sofa, Zoe's hand resting on Maya's knee in a casual gesture of affection that felt calculated and genuine simultaneously. The wait stretched for 10 minutes, long enough for Maya to study every detail of the space and note the security cameras positioned discreetly in the corners. Then a door opened and Sienna Blackwood emerged, and Maya felt every muscle in her body tense with recognition, even as she maintained a relaxed smile. Sienna was exactly as Maya remembered from their initial interview 6 months ago, polished, professional, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess and categorize everything they touched. "Maya, Zoe, congratulations on your engagement." Sienna approached with outstretched hands and a warm smile that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. She was dressed impeccably in a designer suit, her dark hair styled in a sleek bob, and everything about her presentation suggested success and sophistication. She shook their hands with firm confidence, her gaze lingering on their engagement ring before meeting their eyes with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. "I'm so thrilled you chose Everlasting Moments for your special day. I have to say, your engagement announcement was absolutely beautiful, and the photos were stunning. You two make a gorgeous couple." The compliment felt genuine, but also analytical, as though Sienna was already calculating their worth as clients. She gestured toward her office, inviting them to follow her into a space that was part consultation room, part art gallery, with a massive desk and comfortable seating arranged to facilitate intimate conversations about wedding dreams and budgets. Sienna's office was designed to put clients at ease while simultaneously showcasing her success, with leather chairs positioned around a coffee table rather than the formal barrier of sitting across a desk. Maya and Zoe settled together on a small sofa, their body language deliberately intimate, while Sienna took the chair opposite them with a tablet and leather portfolio. "So tell me about yourselves," Sienna began, her voice warm and inviting but her eyes sharp with assessment. "How did you two meet, and what made you decide that Everlasting Moments was the right choice for planning your wedding?" It was a standard opening question, but Maya detected the underlying evaluation, Sienna measuring their responses for authenticity and, more importantly, their financial capacity. Maya launched into their rehearsed story about meeting at a gallery opening, letting her genuine affection for Zoe color the narrative with emotional authenticity. Zoe added details about their first conversation, how Maya's intelligence and dry humor had immediately intrigued her, creating a story that felt lived in rather than fabricated. Sienna listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes on her tablet, her expression warm and engaged throughout their narrative. When they finished describing their relationship and recent engagement, Sienna leaned forward with apparent enthusiasm. "That's absolutely lovely, and I can see how much you care for each other. That genuine connection is what makes weddings truly special, and it's what I try to capture in every event I plan." She pulled up something on her tablet, then continued. "I did a bit of research after receiving your consultation request, Maya. Your work in sustainable technology investment is impressive, and Zoe, your architectural photography is absolutely stunning. I actually follow several galleries that have featured your work." The revelation that Sienna had already investigated them should have felt expected given Maya's research into her methods, but Hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down Maya's spine. This was a woman who left nothing to chance, who verified every detail before committing to clients, exactly the kind of careful operator who could orchestrate complex schemes without leaving obvious evidence. The consultation proceeded through standard wedding planning questions, Sienna extracting their preferences for venues, guest count, aesthetic vision, and budget with practiced efficiency. Maya and Zoe had prepared for these questions, creating detailed preferences that matched their fabricated personas while also genuinely reflecting some of their real tastes. They discussed a potential outdoor ceremony at a vineyard outside Portland, an intimate guest list of around 100 people, and an aesthetic that blended natural elegance with artistic touches that honored Zoe's creative sensibility. Sienna took meticulous notes, occasionally pulling up examples from her portfolio to illustrate possibilities or clarify concepts. She was professional, knowledgeable, and seemed genuinely invested in creating their perfect day, making it almost impossible to reconcile this charming wedding planner with Maya's suspicions about her involvement in Victoria Chen's disappearance. But Maya had learned long ago that criminals often wore the most convincing masks, presenting themselves as trustworthy while orchestrating harm beneath the surface. As the consultation progressed, Maya began subtly steering the conversation toward previous clients, hoping to gather information about Victoria Chen without raising suspicion. "We've heard such incredible things about your work," Maya said, maintaining an enthusiastic tone while watching Sienna's micro-expressions carefully. "One of our friends mentioned she knew someone who used your services for their engagement party last year. Victoria Chen, I think. She said it was absolutely magical." Maya let the name hang in the air, watching for any reaction from Sienna, any sign of recognition or discomfort. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Sienna's face, too quick to fully identify, but there nonetheless, before her professional smile returned seamlessly. "Victoria Chen," Sienna repeated, her voice remaining warm but something subtle shifting in her posture. "Yes, I remember Victoria. Such a lovely woman with exquisite taste. Her engagement party was one of my favorite events from last year. I was so sorry to hear about her disappearance. Have they found her yet? I've been hoping for good news." The question felt genuine on the surface, but Maya's detective instincts caught something performative in Sienna's delivery, as though she were saying the expected things rather than expressing authentic concern. "Not yet," Zoe interjected smoothly, her hand finding Maya's and squeezing gently as though offering comfort about a sad topic. "It's been really hard on everyone who knew her. We didn't know her well, just through mutual acquaintances, but it's frightening to think someone could just vanish like that." Zoe's response was perfect, expressing appropriate emotion while subtly probing for Sienna's reaction to discussing Victoria. Sienna nodded sympathetically, but Maya noticed her fingers tightened slightly around her tablet, a tell that suggested stress or discomfort despite her composed exterior. "It is frightening," Sienna agreed, her voice dropping to a more serious register. "Victoria was so excited about her wedding, so full of plans and dreams. I hope wherever she is, she's safe." The words were appropriate, compassionate, exactly what a concerned wedding planner should say, but something about them felt rehearsed to Maya, like lines Sienna had prepared in case Victoria's name came up in conversation. Maya decided to push slightly further, testing how much information she could extract without revealing her real agenda. "Did the police talk to you during their investigation?" she asked, keeping her tone casual and conversational rather than interrogative. "I imagine they would have wanted to speak with everyone who was at the engagement party." Sienna's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, and Maya saw calculation flash through her eyes before the wedding planner responded. "Yes, a detective came by several months ago, asking questions about the party and whether I noticed anything unusual. I wish I could have been more helpful, but honestly, everything seemed perfect that night. Victoria was happy, her fiancé was devoted, all the guests were celebrating beautifully. There was nothing that suggested anything wrong." Sienna paused, then shifted the conversation back to Maya and Zoe, with practiced redirection. But let's focus on happier topics, shall we? Your wedding is going to be a celebration of your love, and I want to make sure we create something absolutely perfect for you both. The remainder of the consultation covered logistical details, preliminary timelines, and the financial investment required for Sienna's services. The costs were substantial, exactly as Maya had expected for someone catering to Portland's wealthy elite, but Maya Reyes could afford them according to her carefully constructed financial profile. They scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week, when Sienna would present detailed proposals for venues and vendors. As they prepared to leave, Sienna walked them to the door with continued warmth and professionalism, assuring them that she would create something truly special for their celebration. She hugged them both goodbye, and Maya felt the wedding planner's sharp gaze studying them even as she smiled and waved from the doorway. Once they were safely in Maya's car with the doors closed, both women released simultaneous breaths they hadn't realized they'd been holding, the tension of maintaining their performance for over an hour finally dissipating. "She knows something," Maya said immediately, starting the car but not yet pulling out of the parking space, needing to debrief while the meeting was fresh in their minds. "Did you see how she reacted when we mentioned Victoria? That wasn't normal concern. That was controlled response from someone who's thought about what to say if the subject comes up." Zoe nodded agreement, her photographer's eye for detail having apparently caught similar tells. "Her whole demeanor shifted for just a moment when you said Victoria's name. And the way she redirected the conversation back to us when you asked about the police investigation felt defensive, like she didn't want to discuss it any further." They sat in the car reviewing every moment of the consultation, analyzing Sienna's words and body language with the combined skills of a detective and an artist trained to observe human behavior. Maya felt the familiar thrill of an investigation gaining traction, the sense that they were finally making progress after months of hitting dead ends. But beneath that professional excitement was something else, an awareness of Zoe's presence beside her, the way they'd functioned as a seamless team during the meeting, anticipating each other's moves and supporting each other's performance flawlessly. They drove to a quiet coffee shop several blocks away from Sienna's office, needing neutral territory to continue their debriefing without risk of being overheard or observed. Maya chose a corner table away from other patrons, her detective's awareness making her position them where they could see both exits and monitor who entered the shop. Zoe ordered them both coffee and returned with pastries neither had asked for, but both suddenly needed after the tension of their meeting with Sienna. "We need to figure out our next steps," Maya said, pulling out a small notebook where she'd been documenting the investigation in careful shorthand that wouldn't compromise their cover if discovered. "Sienna agreed to work with us, which gives us access and opportunity to gather information. But we need more than suspicious behavior and deflection when Victoria's name comes up. We need actual evidence connecting her to the disappearance." Maya had been a detective long enough to know that hunches and instincts, however strong, meant nothing without proof that would hold up an investigation. Zoe sipped her coffee thoughtfully, her eyes distant as she processed the meeting through her own analytical lens. She's careful, methodical. Everything in her office was curated to present a specific image, and I'd bet her entire business operates the same way. She wouldn't leave obvious evidence lying around for anyone to find. Zoe paused, then met Maya's eyes with sudden intensity. "But she has to have records somewhere, client files, financial transactions, communications. Wedding planners coordinate dozens of vendors and manage significant amounts of money. There has to be a paper trail, digital or physical, that would show if something irregular happened with Victoria's event or the others you mentioned." The suggestion was logical and aligned with Maya's own thinking, but it also implied a level of investigation that would require accessing Sienna's private records, which meant either legal warrants Maya didn't have grounds to obtain or legal searches that could destroy any case they built. Maya rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar frustration of being so close to answers while remaining bound by investigative limitations. "I can't legally search her office or access her files without probable cause, which we don't have beyond my pattern recognition and suspicious behavior. Maya admitted, the words tasting bitter because she knew Victoria Chen's trail grew colder with every passing day. Everything we've done so far as a couple is legitimate undercover work, but crossing into a legal search and seizure would compromise any evidence and probably cost me my badge. She looked at Zoe, seeing understanding and sympathy in those dark eyes. I'm sorry, I brought you into this investigation thinking we could solve it, and now I'm realizing we might just be documenting suspicions we can't prove. The defeat in her own voice surprised Maya, who usually maintained professional optimism even in difficult cases. But this case had become personal in ways that went beyond finding Victoria Chen, bound up now with Zoe and the complicated feelings developing between them that made failure feel more devastating than usual. Zoe reached across the table to take Maya's hand, her touch grounding and reassuring in a way that Maya was beginning to depend on after only 2 days together. Hey, we're not giving up, Zoe said firmly, her photographer's confidence translating into investigation determination. You said Sienna does extensive background checks on clients, right? Which means she has access to information sources, databases, research tools. What if we use our position as her clients to observe how she operates, see what resources she uses, figure out her methods? Zoe's mind was clearly working through possibilities, applying creative problem-solving to their investigative challenge. I'll be meeting with her regularly for wedding planning consultations, which means I'll be in her office, potentially seeing her computer screen, observing her workflows. And if she's as controlling as you think, she probably handles a lot personally rather than delegating to assistants. The suggestion was clever, using their legitimate access as clients to gather intelligence about Sienna's operations without illegal searches. Maya felt hope reignite in her chest, impressed by Zoe's tactical thinking and willingness to take on additional risk for the investigation. That could work, Maya said slowly, her detective's mind already running through scenarios and possibilities. But it also means you'd be spending more time alone with Sienna, putting yourself in closer proximity to someone who might be dangerous. I can't always be there during consultations, especially the detail sessions where brides typically meet one-on-one with wedding planners. The protective instinct surprising Maya with its intensity, she realized she cared deeply about Zoe's safety beyond just professional responsibility for a civilian she'd recruited. Zoe squeezed her hand, acknowledging the concern without backing down. I can handle myself, Maya. And besides, I'll have my camera with me for most meetings, documenting ideas and inspiration for our fake wedding. A camera gives me legitimate reason to photograph anything in her office, capture details that might be relevant to the investigation. The plan was risky but potentially brilliant, using Zoe's real skills to gather information under the guise of artistic documentation. They spent the next hour refining their strategy, Maya coaching Zoe on what to look for and how to document observations without raising suspicion. They discussed dead drops for passing information if Zoe discovered something urgent, established code words they could use in text messages that would alert the other to danger, and created backup plans for various scenarios. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on her shoulders, acutely aware that she was asking Zoe to take risks that went beyond anything she'd originally described when recruiting her for this operation. Are you sure about this? Maya asked one final time, giving Zoe the opportunity to back out before they went deeper into what was becoming an increasingly complex and potentially dangerous investigation. Once we commit to this next phase, it gets harder to extract safely if something goes wrong. I need to know you're absolutely certain, because I couldn't forgive myself if you got hurt helping me chase a hunch about a case. Zoe's answer came without hesitation, her dark eyes steady and certain as they met Maya's worried gaze. I'm sure. Victoria Chen deserves justice, and if Sienna Blackwood is preying on women planning what should be the happiest moments of their lives, then she needs to be stopped. Plus, Zoe added with a slight smile that lightened the serious moment, I'm discovering I'm pretty good at this investigation stuff, and I'm definitely invested in seeing where this partnership goes, both professionally and personally. The dual meaning wasn't lost on Maya, acknowledging both their investigative collaboration and the romantic connection developing between them despite the manufactured nature of their relationship's origin. Maya felt her heart skip at the admission, recognizing that she was equally invested in both aspects of their partnership. They gathered their things and prepared to leave the coffee shop, but Maya caught Zoe's hand before they stood, needing to say something that had been building in her chest since the Japanese garden kiss. "This thing between us," Maya started, searching for words to express complicated emotions she usually kept carefully controlled. "It's not fake for me anymore, if it ever was. I know we started this as an investigation tool, a cover story to get close to Sienna, but somewhere between the boutique and now, it became real. And I need you to know that before we go deeper into this case, because you deserve honesty about where I stand." The confession felt vulnerable and terrifying, but also necessary, Maya's inherent integrity demanding transparency even when it risked complicating their situation further. Zoe's expression softened into something tender and open that made Maya's breath catch. "It's not fake for me either," Zoe said quietly, her thumb tracing circles on Maya's palm. "I told myself I was doing this to help solve a mystery, and because the adventure sounded interesting. But the truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since James's birthday party 2 years ago, and spending these 2 days with you has only confirmed what I suspected then. You're someone extraordinary, Maya Torres, and I want to see where this goes when we're not pretending." The admission hung between them, transforming their fake engagement into something with genuine potential, making the stakes of their investigation both higher and more personal. They left the coffee shop holding hands, not for any camera or audience, but because it felt right, natural, like something they'd been doing for months rather than days. Maya drove them back to her apartment, both women needing to decompress from the intense meeting and subsequent planning session. The afternoon had stretched into early evening, Portland's autumn light turning golden as it slanted through city streets. They picked up Thai food on the way home, falling into an easy domesticity that felt simultaneously brand new and comfortably familiar. Back at Maya's apartment, they ate dinner on the couch while reviewing the photos from their meeting with Sienna that Zoe had surreptitiously taken on her phone, analyzing the office layout and noting details that might be relevant later. The work felt natural, collaborative, two minds approaching a problem from different angles and finding unexpected synergy in their combined perspectives. After dinner, they moved to Maya's small balcony with glasses of wine, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness settled over Portland. The investigation dominated their conversation for a while longer, but gradually they shifted to more personal topics, genuine getting-to-know-you discussions that couples usually had early in relationships. Maya learned that Zoe had grown up in Seattle, that she discovered photography at 13 when her grandmother gave her a vintage camera, that she'd traveled extensively for work, but always came back to the Pacific Northwest because nowhere else felt like home. Maya learned that Maya had been raised by her grandmother after her parents passed away in a car accident when she was 8, that becoming a detective had been about finding answers and creating order in a world that had shown her how quickly stability could shatter, that she rarely let people close because losing those she loved had taught her that caring deeply came with devastating risk. The conversation was intimate and revealing, both women slowly lowering guards they usually kept firmly in place. As the evening deepened into night, Maya found herself studying Zoe's profile in the soft glow of the city lights, memorizing the curve of her jaw and the way her eyes reflected urban illumination like captured stars. The attraction that had sparked in the bridal boutique had evolved into something more substantial, built on shared danger and genuine compatibility that transcended their fabricated cover story. When Zoe turned and caught Maya watching her, neither looked away, the moment stretching between them with unspoken possibility. "Stay again tonight," Maya said softly, the words holding layers of meaning beyond simple logistics. "Not in the guest room this time, if you want. Not because we're pretending for anyone's benefit, but because I want you here with me as something real in the middle of all this deception." The invitation was clear, offering intimacy without pressure, acknowledging the connection between them while respecting Zoe's autonomy to choose how fast they moved forward. Zoe's answer came in the form of leaning forward to kiss Maya, soft and slow and deliberate, a kiss that promised more while remaining present in the moment. They eventually moved inside, leaving wine glasses on the balcony to be retrieved tomorrow, their attention focused entirely on each other as they navigated the shift from colleagues to something more intimate. Maya led Zoe to her bedroom, suddenly self-conscious about the space that was so thoroughly hers, wondering what it revealed about her through Zoe's observant photographer's eyes. But Zoe moved through the room with appreciation rather than judgment, touching the spine of books on Maya's nightstand, admiring the single piece of art on the wall, seeing the person behind the detective's professional armor. They came together again near the bed, kisses deepening as hands explored and clothes gradually became obstacles to overcome. The intimacy that followed was tender and passionate, both women learning each other's bodies with careful attention, creating genuine connection in a situation that had started as complete fabrication. Later, lying tangled together in Maya's bed with moonlight striping across them through partially open blinds, they talked in whispers about everything and nothing, the kind of late-night conversation that builds foundation for lasting relationships. Maya traced patterns on Zoe's shoulder, marveling at how natural this felt, how right, despite having known this woman for barely 48 hours. "What happens when we solve this case?" Zoe asked quietly, voicing the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Does our fake engagement end? Do we stage a breakup for the benefit of our social media audience? Do we just disappear from each other's lives as though this never happened?" The vulnerability in her voice suggested she hoped for a different answer, and Maya was relieved to be able to provide one. "We figure out how to make it real," Maya said with certainty she rarely felt about personal matters. "Maybe not the wedding, at least not immediately, but the relationship, the partnership. We see where this goes when we're not investigating a crime together." The promise settled between them like a vow, more binding than their fake engagement had ever been, and they fell asleep wrapped around each other with unusual peace for two people in the middle of a dangerous investigation. Maya woke first again the next morning, but this time Zoe was beside her rather than in the guest room, her presence transforming Maya's typically lonely apartment into something that felt like home. They had a week until their next scheduled meeting with Sienna, time Maya intended to use investigating other angles while maintaining their public presence as an engaged couple. She also needed to check in with James, update him on their progress, and navigate the complicated task of pursuing an investigation her department wasn't officially supporting. Maya slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Zoe, and made her way to the kitchen to start coffee and check her messages. She found several texts from James asking for an update, and one from an unknown number that made her blood run cold when she opened it. The message contained a single photo, Maya and Zoe leaving Sienna's office the previous day, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, with no accompanying text, but the implication crystal clear. Someone was watching them, had observed their meeting with Sienna, and wanted them to know it. Maya's detective instincts kicked into high gear, her mind racing through possibilities about who sent the message and what it meant for their investigation and safety. She immediately checked the phone number against databases she had access to, finding it belonged to a burner phone purchased with cash 2 days ago, untraceable beyond that initial purchase. The timing was too coincidental. Someone had known they would be meeting with Sienna, which meant either they'd been followed since beginning their fake relationship or Sienna herself had noticed them and was conducting her own investigation into her potential clients. Either possibility was dangerous, suggesting their cover might be compromised or at least suspected, putting both Maya and Zoe at risk. Maya was still staring at her phone when she heard Zoe emerge from the bedroom, her photographer's intuition apparently sensing something was wrong despite Maya's silence. "What is it?" Zoe asked immediately, reading tension in Maya's posture before crossing the apartment to look at the phone screen. Maya showed her the message, watching Zoe's expression shift from morning contentment to sharp focus as she processed the threat. "Someone's watching us. Zoe said, stating the obvious, but needing to voice it aloud to make it concrete. Do you think it's Sienna? Or someone working with her? Or could this be unrelated to the investigation? The questions were logical, the same ones running through Maya's mind, but she had no good answers. They spent the morning analyzing the photo in detail, Zoe using her professional knowledge to determine what kind of camera and lens had taken it based on the image quality and perspective. The equipment was expensive and professional grade, suggesting either a skilled investigator or someone with photography expertise who knew how to conduct surveillance. Maya called James from her secured work phone, explaining the situation and forwarding him the threatening message for analysis by the police tech team. Her partner's concern was immediate and vocal, James arguing that Maya should pull back from the investigation if it had become dangerous enough to warrant surveillance and intimidation. But Maya refused to back down now, not when they were finally making progress and getting close to answers about Victoria Chen. She did agree to take additional precautions, including varying their routes, checking for tails, and implementing better operational security for their communications. James reluctantly agreed to provide backup support while maintaining deniability for the department, a careful balance that protected both the investigation and his own career. After ending the call, Maya turned to Zoe with a serious expression, ready to offer her an out from the investigation now that the risks had escalated beyond what either had initially anticipated when they agreed to this partnership. I need you to really think about whether you want to continue with this, Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of professional responsibility and personal concern. Someone is watching us, which means someone sees us as enough of a threat to monitor our movements. That's not something I take lightly, and it's not what you signed up for when you agreed to help. Maya held Zoe's gaze, trying to communicate the seriousness of the situation while also respecting her autonomy to make her own choices about acceptable risk. Zoe listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful as she processed Maya's words and the implications of the surveillance photo. When Maya finished, Zoe was quiet for a moment before responding with characteristic determination. I'm not backing out, she said firmly, moving closer to Maya and taking both her hands. Yes, this is scarier than I expected, but that just confirms we're onto something real. Sienna, or whoever sent that photo, is rattled, which means we're close to something they want to protect. Backing out now would mean Victoria never gets justice, and I'm not okay with that. Maya felt relief and fear war in her chest, grateful for Zoe's commitment, but terrified of something happening to her because of an investigation Maya had initiated. They spent the rest of the morning implementing security measures, Maya teaching Zoe basic counter-surveillance techniques and establishing protocols for staying safe while maintaining their cover. They decided to increase their public appearances as a couple, reasoning that being visible and photographed by many people might actually provide a strange form of protection by making it harder for whoever was watching to act against them covertly. Maya also reached out to a few trusted contacts in the private investigation community, people who operated in gray areas that police couldn't officially access, asking them to quietly look into Sienna Blackwood's background beyond what public records revealed. By early afternoon, they had a plan for moving forward that balanced continuing the investigation with appropriate caution about the elevated threat level they now faced. Their next public appearance was at a wine tasting event that evening in the Pearl District, an upscale gathering that attracted exactly the kind of clientele Sienna served, and where they might gather additional intelligence about her reputation among Portland's wealthy residents. Maya and Zoe dressed carefully, looking every bit the successful couple celebrating their engagement, though both were now hyper-aware of their surroundings in ways they hadn't been during their first public outings. They arrived at the event holding hands, accepting congratulations from strangers who noticed Zoe's engagement ring, and gradually working their way through the space while staying alert for surveillance. The wine tasting was held in a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings and exposed industrial architecture, the kind of space that Zoe would typically photograph for her portfolio. They sampled wines from local vineyards, made small talk with other attendees, and slowly steered conversations toward wedding planning and vendor recommendations, hoping to gather information about Sienna's reputation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected conversation with a woman named Charlotte Davis, who had been nursing the same glass of wine for 20 minutes while watching the event with detached observation. Maya noticed her because detachment in a social setting usually meant either discomfort or calculation, and her detective instincts made her curious about which. Zoe approached Charlotte first, complimenting her dress and introducing them as newly engaged couple exploring wedding planning options. Charlotte's expression shifted from polite disinterest to something sharper when Zoe mentioned they were working with Sienna Blackwood. Everlasting moments? Charlotte asked, her voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested strong opinions being deliberately suppressed. That's interesting. I almost hired Sienna myself about 3 years ago for my wedding. Changed my mind at the last minute. There was a story beneath those words. Maya sensed it immediately, and she exchanged a glance with Zoe before gently probing for more information. Charlotte seemed to wrestle with whether to say more, glancing around the event space as though checking for eavesdroppers before leaning closer to speak more privately. Look, I don't have proof of anything, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but something felt off about Sienna during our consultations. She asked questions that seemed too personal, too invasive about my finances and family and assets. More than a wedding planner would need to know. Charlotte paused, then continued with obvious discomfort. She also seemed particularly interested in whether my fiancé and I had anyone who would contest our marriage, whether there were family members who disapproved or might cause problems. At the time, I rationalized it as her being thorough about preventing wedding day drama, but looking back, it felt like she was assessing vulnerabilities. Maya's pulse quickened as Charlotte spoke, recognizing the pattern emerging from this account. Sienna wasn't just planning weddings for wealthy lesbian couples. She was evaluating them for something else, some scheme that required detailed knowledge about their personal circumstances and potential weaknesses. Maya pressed Charlotte for more details while maintaining her cover as a concerned bride-to-be rather than an investigating detective. Charlotte explained that she'd ultimately hired a different wedding planner because her gut instinct told her something was wrong about Sienna despite her impeccable credentials and references. I did some checking after I decided not to hire her, Charlotte admitted quietly. Nothing illegal or anything, just asking around, and I heard whispers from a couple of other people who'd had similar reactions. One woman told me her assistant had found Sienna going through her desk during a venue site visit, looking through personal documents that had nothing to do with wedding planning. When confronted, Sienna claimed she was looking for the venue's contact information, but the assistant didn't believe her. The information was circumstantial but compelling, painting a picture of Sienna as someone who used her wedding planning business to gain access to wealthy clients' private information and potentially exploit whatever vulnerabilities she discovered in the process. After Charlotte excused herself to join other friends, Maya and Zoe moved to a quieter corner of the event space to process what they'd learned. She's not just a wedding planner, Zoe said, voicing what Maya was already thinking. She's using the business to identify targets, wealthy women in vulnerable positions during major life transitions who might not notice things going wrong until it's too late. Maya nodded grimly, the pattern now crystal clear in a way it hadn't been before when she only had scattered incidents to connect. Sienna targeted women during engagement and wedding planning, a time when people were distracted, emotional, focused on celebration rather than security. It was brilliant and disturbing, exploiting a moment when people's guards were naturally lowered and their attention divided. We need to find out what specifically she did to Victoria Chen, Maya said, pulling out her phone to text James with their new information. And we need to do it fast before our next meeting with her, because now I'm certain she's dangerous. They left the wine tasting early, Maya's mind already racing through next steps and how to leverage their insider position as Sienna's clients to gather concrete evidence. On the drive back to Maya's apartment, Zoe received a text message that made her gasp audibly. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the message contained information that changed everything. Victoria Chen is alive. She's been hiding in Seattle for 6 months. Sienna Blackwood tried to harm her when Victoria discovered Sienna was embezzling from her business. Meet me tomorrow at Powell's, 2 p.m., Red Room.
Come alone.
I have proof. Maya pulled over immediately to read the message, her detective skepticism warring with desperate hope that Victoria might actually be alive. The message could be legitimate, could be from someone connected to the case who'd been waiting for the right moment to come forward, but it could also be a trap designed to isolate and harm them. Maya called James immediately, reading him the message and asking for his tactical assessment of the situation. Her partner was characteristically cautious, warning that meeting an unknown informant could be dangerous, but also acknowledging this might be their only opportunity to get real evidence against Sienna. They discussed options for over an hour, eventually deciding that Maya would go to the meeting but with James and a backup team positioned nearby in case things went wrong. Zoe initially argued to accompany Maya, but eventually conceded that having her visible elsewhere during the meeting time would provide alibi and safety for them both, if this was indeed a setup. That night, neither of them slept well despite exhaustion, minds racing with possibilities about what the next day would bring and whether they were finally close to solving the mystery that had consumed Maya for 6 months. Maya held Zoe close in the darkness, drawing comfort from her presence while simultaneously fearing what might happen if their investigation had put her in genuine danger. The next afternoon, Maya arrived at Powell's Books 30 minutes early, giving herself time to scout the location and identify exit routes before the scheduled meeting. James had positioned plainclothes officers at strategic points throughout the store, close enough to intervene if needed, but distant enough not to spook a potential informant. At precisely 2 o'clock, Maya was browsing the Red Room section when a woman approached her, someone Maya recognized immediately from case files despite never having met her in person, Victoria Chen, very much alive, looking thinner and more haunted than her photos, but unmistakably the missing woman whose disappearance had launched this entire investigation. Detective Torres, Victoria said quietly, having clearly done her own research to identify Maya despite the fake names she'd been using publicly. I'm sorry for all the secrecy, but I've been hiding for 6 months, terrified Sienna would find me and finish what she started. When I saw your engagement announcement online and realized you were working with her, I knew I had to reach out. They moved to a more secluded corner of the bookstore, Maya signaling to James that the meeting was legitimate while Victoria began telling her story with the desperate urgency of someone who'd been carrying trauma alone for too long. Victoria explained that she'd hired Sienna to plan her engagement party and subsequent wedding, impressed by the planner's professionalism and credentials. During the planning process, Sienna had asked for access to various financial documents and vendor contacts, all seemingly legitimate wedding-related requests. I didn't realize she'd used that access to gradually siphon money from my business accounts, Victoria said, her voice shaking with anger and residual fear. Small amounts at first, easy to overlook or attribute to legitimate wedding expenses, but eventually I noticed discrepancies that didn't add up. When I confronted Sienna 2 days before my engagement party, she was so calm, so collected, like she'd been expecting the conversation. She denied everything, suggested I was stressed and seeing problems where there were none. Victoria continued her story, explaining that she'd hired a forensic accountant after the engagement party to investigate the financial irregularities she'd noticed. The accountant confirmed my suspicions within days, found evidence of systematic embezzlement going back months, traced the stolen money to accounts connected to Sienna's business. I was preparing to go to the police when someone broke into my apartment and threatened me. Victoria's hands trembled as she described the frightening encounter, managing to escape through a back exit and making the split-second decision to disappear rather than risk another confrontation. She'd withdrawn cash, left her phone and credit cards behind to avoid being traced, and fled to Seattle where she'd been living under an assumed name for 6 months. I knew Sienna had to be behind the threat, but I had no proof, and I was terrified. So I stayed hidden, watching from a distance, trying to figure out how to expose her without putting myself at risk again. Maya listened to Victoria's account with a combination of professional assessment and personal outrage, furious that this woman had been forced into hiding while Sienna continued operating her business and potentially targeting other victims. "I have copies of everything the forensic accountant found," Victoria said, pulling a flash drive from her bag with hands that shook slightly. "Bank records, email correspondence, documentation of the embezzlement scheme. It's all here. Enough to prove what Sienna did to me and probably establish pattern evidence for other victims if you can find them." Maya took the flash drive carefully, already thinking about chain of custody and how to get this evidence properly authenticated for legal proceedings. She asked Victoria dozens of follow-up questions, gathering details that would be crucial for building a prosecutable case, while also gently encouraging Victoria to come forward officially and work with the police rather than continuing to live in hiding. Victoria was initially reluctant, fear still dominating her response despite her brave decision to reach out, but Maya eventually convinced her that Sienna could only be stopped if Victoria was willing to testify. They arranged for Victoria to enter protective custody while the investigation moved forward, James coordinating with Seattle police to ensure her safety. Maya immediately contacted her captain to brief him on the development, finally providing the evidence and witness testimony that would justify official department resources for the investigation. Within hours, detectives were analyzing the financial records Victoria had provided, tech specialists were examining digital trails, and prosecutors were assessing what charges they could bring against Sienna Blackwood. Maya felt the familiar rush of a case breaking open, pieces finally falling into place after months of frustration, but her thoughts kept returning to Zoe, waiting anxiously for updates about whether the meeting had been safe and productive. Maya called Zoe as soon as she could step away from the coordinated law enforcement response, needing to hear her voice and share the news that Victoria was alive and their investigation had been validated. Zoe's relief was audible through the phone, her voice breaking slightly as she absorbed the information that their efforts had led to finding a missing woman rather than just solving a crime. "You did it," Zoe said, pride evident in her tone. "You found Victoria, and you're going to stop Sienna from hurting anyone else." The praise made Maya uncomfortable in the way she usually felt about recognition, but coming from Zoe, it also felt meaningful in ways that professional accolades never had. They made plans to meet at Maya's apartment after Maya finished coordinating with her department, both needing to process the day's developments and figure out what came next for their relationship now that the investigation that had brought them together was essentially concluded. The arrest of Sienna Blackwood happened 3 days later, a coordinated operation that involved multiple jurisdictions and charges ranging from embezzlement to conspiracy and threats. Maya and her team executed the arrest warrant at Sienna's office, finding additional evidence during their search that connected her to at least 2 other victims beyond Victoria Chen. Sienna maintained her composed exterior even when confronted with the evidence, her lawyer immediately advising her not to speak. But Maya saw fear flicker in the wedding planner's eyes when she realized how thoroughly her scheme had been exposed. The investigation revealed that Sienna had been operating her criminal enterprise for at least 5 years, using her wedding planning business as cover to identify wealthy clients, gain access to their financial information, and systematically steal from them while they were distracted by wedding preparations. In Victoria's case, she'd escalated to threats and intimidation when her victim had discovered the theft, a horrifying development that might have continued if Maya hadn't connected the pattern and pursued the investigation. The case made headlines throughout Portland, the dramatic story of a wedding planner who targeted lesbian couples capturing public attention and outrage. Maya gave several press conferences alongside her captain, carefully managing the narrative to protect Victoria's privacy while ensuring the public understood the scope of Sienna's crimes. Throughout the media attention and legal proceedings, Zoe remained a steady presence in Maya's life, attending court hearings and providing support during the stressful weeks of building the prosecution's case. Their fake engagement had served its purpose and could have been quietly dissolved now that the investigation was over, but neither of them wanted to end what had become profoundly real despite its fabricated beginning. 3 months after Sienna's arrest, they held a small private ceremony at the Portland Japanese Garden, exchanging vows that were genuine this time, witnessed by James and a handful of close friends who knew their unusual story. Victoria Chen attended their wedding, healthy and healing from her ordeal, grateful to the couple whose fake engagement had ultimately saved her from harm and brought her justice. As Maya and Zoe stood together on the moon bridge, where they'd shared their first kiss, exchanging rings and promises in front of people they loved, Maya reflected on how a cold case and a desperate plan had led her to the most unexpected and genuine partnership she'd ever known. The investigation had ended, but their story was just beginning. Two women who'd pretended to be in love and discovered something far more real in the process. Their wedding photos, taken by one of Zoe's photographer friends, were beautiful and authentic, capturing joy that needed no performance because it was absolutely genuine. And somewhere in the celebration of their real beginning, Maya silently thanked the case that had brought them together, even as she hoped never to need such dramatic circumstances to find love again.